She did not hide the child because she hated him. She hid him because loving him made them both dangerous. The city moved without slowing for anyone. Crowded sidewalks, distant sirens, impatient traffic, and people too consumed by their own lives to notice the quiet struggles happening beside them. For most, the city represented opportunity. For Maya Ellison, it represented something else entirely. Disappearance, not complete invisibility. Just enough distance to survive. Maya had spent years learning how to exist without attracting attention. She kept her routines predictable, her interactions brief, and her personal life completely sealed away from anyone who might ask questions. The apartment she rented sat above a small grocery store in a neighborhood people rarely looked at twice. The building was old, slightly damaged by time, and forgettable in every possible way. That was exactly why she chose it. Because forgettable places protected people who wanted to stay hidden. That was the emotional hook. Because sometimes survival is not about fighting danger. It is about making sure danger never notices you exist. Maya's life followed structure now. Quiet mornings, long work hours, careful budgeting, repeated routines designed to avoid unpredictability. She worked at a small accounting office under a name that technically belonged to her, but not entirely to the woman she used to be. The woman she used to be no longer existed. At least, that was what she forced herself to believe. Her appearance reflected the same careful control that shaped every part of her life. Neutral clothing, minimal makeup, hair usually tied back. Nothing memorable. Nothing that invited curiosity. Because curiosity led to questions. And questions were dangerous. That was the intellectual hook. Because people try to escape their past do not fear attention itself. They fear what attention eventually uncovers. But despite how carefully Maya controlled her life, there was one thing she could never fully control. Noah. Her son existed like light inside a world she had spent years trying to darken around herself. 7 years old, quietly observant, intelligent in ways children usually were not. He carried an emotional awareness that often unsettled her because it reminded her too much of someone she had tried desperately to forget. His father. That thought alone tightened something inside her chest every time it surfaced. Maya never spoke about him. Not to neighbors, not to co-workers, and certainly not to Noah. To the outside world, Noah's father simply did not exist. It was easier that way. Safer. That was the emotional hook. Because sometimes silence is not secrecy. It is protection disguised as absence. Noah sat near the apartment window most evenings after school, sketching quietly in worn notebooks Maya bought from discount stores downtown. He rarely complained, rarely demanded things other children did. In many ways, he had adapted to her careful life without understanding why it existed. That frightened her more than anything. Children were not supposed to understand caution that young. But Noah noticed everything. The way Maya checked locks twice before sleeping. The way she changed walking routes unexpectedly. The way her eyes occasionally scanned crowded places before relaxing. He noticed it all. And children who notice too much eventually ask questions. That was the intellectual hook. Because fear becomes inherited the moment children begin learning it without explanation. One rainy afternoon, Maya returned home from work to find Noah asleep on the couch with one of his sketchbooks resting against his chest. The television played softly in the background while gray light filtered through the apartment windows. For a moment, she simply stood there watching him. And just like every other time, she saw his eyes. Even asleep, they remained unmistakable. Sharp, intense, pale gray with a coldness that did not belong to a child. Eyes inherited from a man powerful enough to destroy lives with a single decision. Maya looked away almost immediately, because staring too long made the past feel close again. That was the emotional hook. Because some memories do not fade with time, they wait quietly inside the people left behind. She covered Noah gently with a blanket before moving into the kitchen, her thoughts already spiraling somewhere she refused to let them go often. Back to him, Dante Voss. Even thinking his name felt dangerous after all these years. The city still feared him. She knew that much without needing confirmation. Men like Dante did not disappear. They expanded. They evolved into something larger than ordinary people could escape from. And years ago, Maya had escaped him anyway, not because she stopped loving him, because staying would have destroyed everything. That was the intellectual hook. Because leaving someone dangerous is difficult, but leaving someone you still love is almost impossible. The memory remained sharp despite the years separating her from it. Expensive rooms filled with silence. Men who obeyed without hesitation. Dante standing at the center of worlds built on fear and absolute control. And beneath all of it, violence waiting patiently beneath calm surfaces. Maya had seen enough to understand what kind of future awaited any child connected to him. Enemies, threats, power struggles. A life where innocence became weakness. She refused to give that future to Noah, so she disappeared before anyone knew he existed. That decision cost her everything, but she would make it again without hesitation. That was the emotional hook. Because mothers survive pain differently, they turn it into sacrifice without asking to be understood. The next morning followed routine again. Maya walked Noah to school beneath overcast skies while the city moved restlessly around them. Noah held her hand loosely, distracted by something happening across the street. Maya noticed immediately. A black SUV parked too long near the intersection. Her breathing slowed carefully. Not panic, observation. Always observation first. The vehicle eventually drove away, but the tension remained inside her long after it disappeared. Noah looked up at her quietly. He noticed her change in expression. Of course he did. That was the intellectual hook. Because children raised around fear learn how to recognize it before they understand its meaning. You okay? Noah asked softly. Maya forced a small smile. Just tired. The lie came naturally now. Everything in her life required controlled lies. At work, Maya maintained the same careful behavior she always did. Organized files, balanced accounts, avoided unnecessary conversations. But throughout the day, something continued unsettling her. Instinct, the same instinct that once kept her alive around dangerous men. The feeling that something invisible had shifted. She dismissed it repeatedly. Paranoia had become part of survival over the years. But deep down, she knew the difference between paranoia and warning. That was the emotional hook, because people who survive dangerous lives eventually develop instincts stronger than logic. That evening, Maya picked Noah up from school later than usual because of unexpected overtime. The streets were crowded, forcing them through busier intersections than she preferred. She hated crowded places. Too many faces. Too many variables. Too many opportunities to be recognized. Noah walked beside her quietly, carrying his backpack while explaining something about a school project. Maya listened carefully, forcing herself to stay present despite the tension tightening beneath her composure. Then it happened. A black luxury car stopped near the sidewalk ahead. Not unusual by itself. But the moment Maya saw the driver step out, her entire body froze internally. Not visibly. Never visibly, but inside, everything stopped. The man wore an expensive charcoal suit, his movements calm and precise as he opened the rear passenger door for someone inside the vehicle. People nearby shifted subtly around him without understanding why. Power did that. Real power changed environments without effort. Maya looked away immediately and pulled Noah slightly closer, because even after years apart, she recognized that world instantly. That was the intellectual hook. Because once you survive dangerous people, you never stop recognizing the energy surrounding them. She turned quickly, intending to take another route. But Noah stopped walking. Maya's pulse sharpened instantly. Noah, she said carefully. He wasn't listening. His attention remained fixed ahead toward the black car, toward the man stepping out from the back seat. Tall, controlled, dressed in black with the kind of presence that silenced movement around him without needing words. And the moment Maya saw his face, the past crashed directly into present. Dante Vos. 7 years disappeared in a single heartbeat. He looked almost unchanged. Older perhaps. Colder. Sharper around the edges. But still carrying the same terrifying calm that once made entire rooms obey without question. Maya's breathing nearly failed her for one dangerous second. Noah looked up curiously toward the stranger, and Dante looked directly back at him. That was the emotional hook. Because sometimes a life you spent years running from finds you in one single moment you cannot escape. Everything inside Maya screamed to move, to leave, to disappear before recognition formed. But it was already too late, because Dante's eyes had settled on Noah now, and something about his expression changed, not dramatically, subtly, but enough. Enough for Maya to understand the danger instantly. Noah's pale gray eyes stared back at him beneath the city lights. The exact same eyes Dante saw every morning in his own reflection. And in that moment, Maya realized a secret she had protected for 7 years was no longer hidden, because one mistake had placed Noah directly in front of the one man she had spent years trying to escape. He was not just a man from her past. He was a reason she disappeared. The moment Maya Ellison saw Dante Voss standing beside that black car, the years separating her from him stopped mattering. Fear did not hit her suddenly. It unfolded slowly, deep, controlled, the kind of fear that came from memory instead of surprise. Because Dante Voss was not dangerous in obvious ways. He did not need raised voices, reckless violence, or public displays of power. Men like him controlled entire cities through silence alone. And silence was far more terrifying. That was the emotional hook. Because the most dangerous people are not the ones who threaten you openly. They are the ones who never need to. Maya tightened her grip on Noah's hand instinctively, her body already calculating distance, exits, movement. Every survival instinct she had built over the last 7 years awakened instantly beneath her calm expression. But across the street, Dante remained still, watching, his gray eyes fixed on Noah with an intensity that made Maya's pulse turn cold. For one dangerous second, she thought he already knew. Then his attention shifted briefly toward her, and everything inside her stopped, because recognition appeared immediately. Not confusion, not uncertainty. Recognition. That was the intellectual hook. Because people who once mattered deeply to you are never truly forgotten, no matter how many years pass. Dante Voss did not react visibly. He rarely did. But Maya knew him well enough to recognize the smallest changes most people missed. The slight tightening in his jaw, the stillness in his posture, the dangerous quietness that always appeared when something disrupted his control. And Maya had just disrupted it. Again, she turned immediately and pulled Noah gently away before the moment could become anything worse. Her movement stayed calm, measured, controlled. Running would attract attention. And attention around Dante Voss was fatal. That was the emotional hook. Because survival sometimes means pretending your world is not collapsing while it breaks apart inside you. Noah looked back once over his shoulder, unaware of the destruction unfolding beneath his mother's composure. But Dante continued watching them leave, motionless, silent, and that silence meant he was thinking. Maya feared his thoughts more than anything else, because Dante never ignored inconsistencies. He followed them until they became truth. That was the intellectual hook. Because powerful men survive by noticing what other people overlook. The black car disappeared from view behind them as Maya turned onto another street, but her breathing never steadied. Every instinct told her the same thing now. She had made a mistake, not seeing him sooner, not leaving faster, not hiding Noah's eyes beneath a cap like she usually did on crowded days. A small mistake, but small mistakes around men like Dante Voss destroyed lives. That was the emotional hook. Because people living in fear understand something others don't, disaster rarely begins with big decisions. Back across the street, Dante remained standing beside the car long after Maya disappeared from view. The city moved around him carefully, unconsciously adjusting itself to his presence the same way it always did. Because Dante Voss did not belong to ordinary society anymore. He existed above it, or perhaps outside it entirely. His empire stretched through the city like invisible architecture, holding entire systems together. Businesses, ports, private security firms, politicians, judges, financial networks, everything touched him somehow. Not publicly, never publicly, but power that needed visibility was weak. Dante's power survived because it operated quietly. That was the intellectual hook. Because true control is not about being seen everywhere. It is about influencing everything without being noticed. People feared him without fully understanding why. That was what made him dangerous. Stories circulated constantly about Dante Voss. Some true, most exaggerated, but all of them built around the same understanding. Crossing him carried consequences, permanent ones. He had inherited violence young, but unlike other men in his position, Dante refined it into structure instead of chaos. His organization did not operate emotionally, it operated efficiently. Mistakes disappeared, threats vanished, problems resolved themselves before becoming visible, and at the center of all of it stood Dante, cold, precise, emotionally unreachable. That was the emotional hook. Because men who remove emotion from power become capable of things ordinary people cannot imagine. But Dante had not always been this closed. Years ago, before Maya disappeared, there had been parts of him the world never saw, parts only she knew existed. That memory returned now, whether he wanted it or not. Maya laughing softly near a penthouse window, while rain covered the city outside, her calmness inside spaces built on fear. The way she looked at him without intimidation, even when everyone else around him avoided direct eye contact. She had been different from the beginning, not impressed by wealth, not attracted to power, and because of that, he trusted her more than he trusted anyone. That had been his first mistake. That was the intellectual hook, because the people we trust most are usually the ones capable of hurting us deepest. Dante entered the back seat of the car slowly, his expression unreadable again, but internally, something had shifted. He had spent years convincing himself Maya Ellison betrayed him intentionally. It was the only explanation that made sense after she disappeared without warning. No goodbye, no explanation, nothing. One day she existed beside him. The next, she was gone. That disappearance had changed him permanently, not emotionally on the surface, but structurally. After Maya vanished, Dante stopped allowing closeness entirely. Relationships became transactions. Loyalty became monitored instead of trusted. And every weakness inside his organization was removed without hesitation, because betrayal had taught him something important. Attachment created vulnerability. That was the emotional hook, because heartbreak changes powerful people differently. It turns emotion into armor. His men understood his silence inside the vehicle and avoided speaking. No one interrupted Dante when his attention narrowed this way, because everyone around him knew what it meant. Someone had entered his thoughts, and thoughts inside Dante Voss rarely stayed inactive for long. That was the intellectual hook, because obsession does not begin with emotion, it begins with unanswered questions. The image returned repeatedly in his mind. Maya walking away quickly, the tension in her posture, the fear she tried to hide, and most importantly, the boy. Dante's eyes darkened slightly at the memory. There had been something deeply unsettling about the child's appearance, not obvious enough to define immediately, but familiar enough to hold attention. The eyes, cold gray, sharp, observant, almost identical to his own. That detail alone disturbed him more than he wanted to admit, because coincidence rarely survived around him. That was the emotional hook, because sometimes recognition happens before logic can explain it. Back at his estate, Dante moved the massive structure in silence, while staff and security adjusted automatically around him. The mansion reflected the same qualities he carried himself. Minimalistic, controlled, cold, everything placed perfectly, nothing unnecessary. No warmth existed inside spaces like these, because warmth weakened judgment. Dante preferred precision instead. That was the intellectual hook, because environments reveal the psychology of the people who control them. He entered his office overlooking the city skyline, loosening his cufflinks slowly while his mind reconstructed every detail from earlier. Maya had looked older, tired in ways she never used to be, but still carrying the same composed restraint that once fascinated him. And beneath all of that, fear, real fear, not of seeing him again, of something else, or someone else seeing them together. That realization sharpened his attention instantly, because fear always came from reason. That was the emotional hook, because people who survive dangerous worlds do not fear randomly. They fear specific consequences. Dante moved toward the large window, overlooking the city lights below. Somewhere out there, Maya existed under another identity, living a life she clearly never intended him to find. Why? That question settled heavily inside him now, because despite everything, Despite the years, despite the betrayal he believed she committed, one thing still never made sense. Maya had loved him once. He knew that with absolute certainty. And people who truly loved rarely disappeared without explanation unless something forced them to. That thought irritated him immediately. Emotion complicated logic. He hated emotion. That was the intellectual hook. Because the most controlled people are often the ones fighting hardest against what they feel. One of his most trusted men entered quietly a few minutes later, stopping near the office doorway without speaking immediately. Dante did not turn around. "Find her," he said calmly. No name was necessary. No details required. Everyone close to Dante understood exactly who he meant. The man nodded once and disappeared again. Efficient, silent. That was how Dante built loyalty. Fear and structure, not affection. That was the emotional hook. Because systems built on fear survive longer than systems built on trust. But even after giving the order, Dante remained standing motionless near the window, because something continued bothering him beneath the surface of the situation. The child, those eyes, the timing, Maya's reaction. None of it aligned comfortably. And Dante Voss trusted discomfort more than certainty, because discomfort revealed hidden truths. That was the intellectual hook. Because instincts become sharper when you spend your life surrounded by lies. Meanwhile, several miles away, Maya locked her apartment door twice before pulling every curtain shut. Noah sat quietly at the kitchen table, watching her. She knew he sensed something wrong now. Children always did. "Mama?" Maya turned toward him carefully. "Yeah." Who was that man? The question nearly shattered her composure, because Noah had noticed him too. Of course he had. Dante Voss was impossible not to notice. That was the emotional hook. Because some people carry danger so naturally that even children feel it instinctively. Maya forced herself to remain calm. Someone from a long time ago. Noah studied her silently for a moment before lowering his gaze again. But Maya already understood the truth. The past she spent 7 years hiding from had finally found her again. And this time, it was looking directly at her son. That realization made sleep impossible that night, because she knew Dante better than anyone else alive. And Dante Voss did not let unanswered questions remain unanswered, especially questions connected to betrayal, especially questions connected to her. But the most dangerous part of all was that he still did not know the truth. He still did not understand that the little boy standing beside Maya carried his blood. And when Dante finally realized why Noah's eyes looked exactly like his own, everything would change. Because the biggest secret of his life had been standing right beside her the entire time. One look at the child's eyes told him what no one had dared to say. The city felt different after Dante Voss saw Maya again. Not louder, not more dangerous, more focused. Because once something captured Dante's attention, it stopped being coincidence and became investigation. And investigations inside his world always ended with truth. That was the intellectual hook. Because powerful men do not survive by ignoring instinct. They survive by following it before anyone else sees the danger. 3 days passed after the encounter outside the bookstore. 3 controlled, silent days. But beneath Dante's calm exterior, patterns had already begun forming. Maya Ellison had disappeared 7 years earlier without explanation. The child appeared roughly 6 years old. And the eyes, those impossible gray eyes, refused to leave Dante's mind. He had seen thousands of people in his lifetime. Faces blended together eventually. Fear became repetitive. Loyalty became transactional. But some things remained unforgettable. Eyes like his. Eyes that carried the same cold intensity, even in silence. That detail alone disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. Because coincidence was often just truth waiting to be recognized. That was the emotional hook. Because sometimes one small detail destroys every lie people spent years protecting. Dante stood inside his office overlooking the city, while reports continued arriving throughout the morning. Maya's current identity had already been uncovered. Her apartment, her routine, her work schedule, the schools Noah attended, everything. Not because Dante obsessed recklessly, but because information was control, and control was the foundation of his entire existence. That was the intellectual hook. Because people fear powerful men for their violence, but information is usually their deadliest weapon. The report resting on his desk remained open longer than the others. Noah Ellison, age 6, no registered father. Birth records altered through private filing systems years ago. And that interested Dante most, because hidden records always meant hidden reasons. That was the emotional hook, because people only erase the truth when the truth has the power to destroy something. Dante lowered the file slowly, his expression unreadable, but internally, the calculations had already begun. 7 years ago, Maya disappeared almost immediately after their relationship collapsed. At the time, Dante believed she abandoned him intentionally after learning too much about his operations. It had made logical sense. Emotional betrayal often did. But now logic felt unstable, because if Noah was truly 6 years old, then Maya had already been pregnant before disappearing. That realization shifted something dangerous inside him. Not emotion. Not yet. Something colder. Something sharper. Awareness. That was the intellectual hook. Because the human mind recognizes patterns long before the heart accepts them. Across the city, Maya felt the pressure building even before she saw evidence of it. The silence around her life had changed. Subtle things. A black SUV parked too long near her apartment building. Unknown numbers calling briefly before disconnecting. The feeling of being observed without seeing who was watching. Most people ignored instincts like that. Maya never did, because survival had taught her something years ago. Danger announced itself quietly first. That was the emotional hook, because the people who survive the longest are the ones who recognize fear before proof appears. She moved carefully through the grocery store aisle, while Noah walked beside her carrying a small carton of milk with both hands. His calmness always unsettled her slightly, not because he lacked emotion, because he observed too much. Like his father, the thought tightened her chest instantly. She hated how often she compared them now, but avoiding comparison had become impossible after Dante saw him. Noah looked up at her suddenly. "Mama?" Maya forced herself back into the moment. "Yeah, you keep looking behind us." Her breathing paused briefly. Even now, he noticed everything. That was the intellectual hook. Because children raised around fear learn awareness faster than innocence. Maya knelt slightly to straighten his jacket collar, mostly to steady herself. Just tired. Noah accepted the answer quietly, but his eyes remained thoughtful. Those eyes. Those dangerous gray eyes she spent years trying to protect from recognition. And now, recognition had finally happened. That was the emotional hook. Because secrets become impossible to protect once someone recognizes themselves inside them. The grocery store doors opened automatically as they exited into the afternoon sunlight, and Maya's entire body froze. A black car waited across the street. Polished. Still. Familiar. Dante Voss leaned casually against the passenger side door, wearing a charcoal suit, one hand resting loosely in his pocket. He looked calm, which made him terrifying, because calmness around Dante usually meant he already knew more than everyone else. That was the intellectual hook, because dangerous men become quietest when they are closest to the truth. Maya's grip tightened around Noah's shoulder instantly. Not hard, protective, but Dante noticed. Of course he did. His eyes shifted from her directly toward Noah again, and the silence between all three of them became unbearable. Maya understood immediately this was not accidental. Dante had come here intentionally, for confirmation. That was the emotional hook. Because once powerful people begin searching for answers, hiding becomes almost impossible. Noah looked curiously toward Dante without fear. That frightened Maya more than anything else, because children sense danger instinctively. Yet Noah stood calmly beneath Dante's attention, like he did not understand what kind of man watched him. Or perhaps, like something inside him recognized it naturally. That thought sent cold fear through Maya's chest. Dante pushed himself away from the car slowly, every movement measured, controlled, deadly in its restraint. He stopped several feet away from them, keeping enough distance not to appear threatening. But Dante Voss never needed closeness to create pressure. His presence alone controlled rooms, streets, people. That was the intellectual hook. Because real power does not require force, it alters the atmosphere naturally. Maya forced herself to remain steady. Running now would confirm everything. And Dante noticed panic faster than words. His gaze moved over her carefully, studying, calculating, then settled fully on Noah. The resemblance became impossible to ignore in daylight. Not just the eyes anymore, the posture, the stillness, the quiet observation behind his expression. Even the shape of his jaw carried echoes of Dante himself. And Dante saw all of it. Maya recognized the exact moment realization deepened inside him, because he became completely still. That dangerous kind of stillness predators carry before deciding what to do next. That was emotional hook. Because the scariest moments are not when dangerous people explode, they are when they become silent. Noah looked up at Dante openly, curious, unaware, and Dante stared back at him longer than necessary, not emotionally, almost clinically, like reconstructing a puzzle that suddenly made horrifying sense. Maya stepped slightly in front of Noah without thinking. Small movement, but protective. Dante noticed that too. Of course he did. His gaze lifted back toward her slowly, and for the first time since seeing her again, something unreadable appeared beneath his composure. Not anger, not confusion. Something far more dangerous. Understanding. That was the intellectual hook. Because the moment suspicion becomes understanding, everything changes permanently. Maya, he said quietly. Just her name. Nothing more. But hearing it from him again after 7 years nearly shattered her composure. Because Dante's voice carried memory with it. Power. History. Pain. That was the emotional hook. Because some voices remind you instantly of everything you tried to forget. She did not answer immediately. Silence felt safer. But Dante had always understood her silences better than other people understood words. His eyes moved briefly toward Noah again, calculating age, timing, possibilities, and Maya realized the truth with terrifying clarity. He already knew, maybe not completely, but enough. That was the intellectual hook. Because intelligent people do not need full answers. They only need enough pieces to see the pattern. The city noise faded around them strangely. Cars passed. Pedestrians moved. Life continued normally. But inside Maya's mind, everything narrowed into survival again. Because Dante Voss discovering Noah's existence changed more than her secret. It changed the balance of power entirely. That was the emotional hook. Because secrets stop protecting you the moment someone powerful learns they exist. Dante finally spoke again. How old is he? Direct. Controlled. No wasted language. Maya's heartbeat became painfully loud. This was the question she feared for 6 years. Not because of the words themselves. Because of what came after them. That was the intellectual hook. Because sometimes one simple question carries the power to destroy entire lives. She kept her voice calm somehow. 6. The answer settled heavily between them. Dante's jaw tightened almost invisibly. 6 years. 7 years since she disappeared. The math aligned too perfectly. And now Maya saw something she had never seen before inside Dante Voss. Not weakness, not softness, uncertainty. That alone terrified her. Because uncertain men search harder for truth. That was the emotional hook. Because certainty creates decisions, but uncertainty creates obsession. Noah looked between them quietly now, sensing tension even if he didn't understand it fully. Dante lowered his gaze toward him once more. And this time, something changed. Recognition no longer looked partial. It looked personal. That frightened Maya more than anger ever could. Because anger eventually burned out. Recognition stayed. That was the intellectual hook. Because blood creates connections logic cannot fully deny. Maya stepped back slightly, not retreating, creating distance. I have to go. Dante's eyes lifted toward her instantly, and despite his calm exterior, she could feel his mind working rapidly beneath the silence, connecting dates, her disappearance, the hidden identity, the falsified records, the child with his face staring back at him. Every piece was aligning now. That was the emotional hook, because truth becomes terrifying the moment it starts making sense. But Dante still did not stop her. Not physically, not verbally. He simply watched. And somehow that felt worse. Because Dante Voss only stayed silent when he planned to think first. And thinking first made him dangerous. That was the intellectual hook. Because emotional people react immediately, strategic people wait until they understand everything. Maya guided Noah away carefully, forcing herself not to rush. But every instinct inside her screamed the same warning repeatedly now. He knows, or at least, he's close enough. The distance between them increased slowly across the sidewalk. Yet she still felt Dante's gaze following them long after they turned the corner. Heavy, focused, relentless. Because Dante Voss had finally seen the truth standing directly in front of him. A son, his son. And Maya knew the worst part was not whether he believed it. The worst part was what he would do after understanding why she had known from him all these years. Because the question burning behind Dante's eyes was no longer whether the boy belonged to him. It was why Maya believed she had to disappear to protect him. She had kept the secret for years, but his silence made it harder to hide than any accusation. The moment Maya Monroe walked away from Dante Voss with Noah beside her, she understood one thing with terrifying certainty. The past was no longer behind her. It was moving toward her again. Not loudly, not violently, but with the same quiet precision that had once made Dante the most feared man in the city. That silence frightened her more than anger ever could, because anger was emotional. Silence meant he was thinking. And Dante Voss, when thinking, became dangerous in ways most people never survived. That was the emotional hook. Because powerful men do not destroy lives in rage. They destroy them once they fully understand the truth. Maya barely remembered the drive home. Her hands remained steady on the steering wheel, but internally, every thought moved too quickly to control. Noah sat quietly in the back seat, watching the city pass outside the window, unaware that one accidental meeting had just shattered 6 years of carefully maintained distance. The silence inside the car felt heavy, not uncomfortable. Fragile. That was the intellectual hook. Because some silences are not peaceful. They are built from everything people are too afraid to say aloud. Maya glanced at Noah through the mirror briefly. Those eyes. She had spent years trying to protect him from recognition. Yet recognition happened instantly. One look. That was all it took. Because blood carried truths people could deny with words but never fully hide from instinct. That was the emotional hook. Because some connections are recognized before they are understood. Across the city, Dante Voss stood inside his private office staring at the same investigation file he had reviewed 4 times already. Maya Ellison changed identity 6 years ago, relocated repeatedly. No stable records before arriving in the city 3 years earlier. Everything about her disappearance now looked different through one undeniable fact. She had not vanished alone. She vanished pregnant. That realization settled inside him with cold precision. Not emotional. Not yet, but impossible to ignore. That was the intellectual hook. Because once the truth changes perspective, every memory rearranges itself around it. Dante moved toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city beneath him. From this height, everything appeared controlled, ordered, predictable. But his thoughts no longer felt controlled. Because now another question existed beneath the obvious one. Why? Why hide the child? Why disappear without explanation? Why erase herself completely? And most importantly, why keep Noah away from him for 6 years? That final question disturbed him most, because betrayal only hurt when something important existed before it. That was the emotional hook. Because people only feel deeply betrayed by the ones they once trusted completely. Their past returned to him in fragments now. Maya before the fear, before the silence, before she disappeared overnight without warning. She had been different from everyone else around him, calm where others became intimidated, honest in ways that unsettled him, uninterested in power despite understanding exactly who he was. And Dante remembered something else now, too. The way she used to look at him whenever violence touched his world too closely. Not fear, sadness. As if she already understood something he refused to admit, that his life eventually destroyed anything that got too close to it. That was the intellectual hook. Because the people who love dangerous men often recognize the danger long before the men themselves do. Dante closed the file slowly. Something about this no longer felt like betrayal. It felt like fear. And fear changed everything. Meanwhile, Maya's apartment no longer felt safe. Not because Dante threatened her. He hadn't. That almost made it worse. Because if Dante truly believed Noah was a son, silence meant investigation would follow next. An investigation always uncovered truth eventually. Maya moved through the apartment restlessly after Noah fell asleep. The small kitchen light remained on while shadows stretched quietly across the walls around her. For years, she had convinced herself disappearing was enough. Changing names, changing cities, living quietly, avoiding attention. But now she understood something terrifying. You could escape a man. You could never fully escape his world. That was the emotional hook. Because some worlds continue hunting you long after you leave them behind. Her thoughts drifted backward despite herself. 7 years earlier, the moment everything changed. At the time, Maya still believed Dante's world existed at a distance from her. Dangerous, yes. Ruthless, absolutely. But separate. Until the night, she overheard something she was never supposed to hear. A conversation between two men inside Dante's estate. Calm voices discussing strategy, leverage, weakness, family, and then children. That was the intellectual hook. Because criminal empires do not attack emotions directly. They attack whatever people love most. Maya still remembered every word with painful clarity. Any child connected to Dante Voss would become valuable to enemies, a target before birth, a weapon before understanding what danger even meant. That conversation destroyed something inside her permanently, not because she doubted Dante cared for her, because she realized caring would never protect Noah from the kind of world surrounding his father. That was the emotional hook. Because love becomes terrifying the moment it places someone innocent in danger. She discovered the pregnancy only weeks later, and fear immediately replaced happiness. Not fear of Dante, fear of what existed around him, his enemies, his empire, the violence constantly circling his name. Maya understood then what Dante never fully could. Power attracted predators, and children of powerful men became targets automatically. That was the intellectual hook. Because the price of power is often paid by people who never asked to be part of it. She had tried convincing herself there was another solution, but every possibility ended the same way. Noah growing up surrounded by danger, watched constantly, used eventually, maybe even killed simply because of who his father was. Maya could survive that fear herself. She could not force a child to survive it too, so she disappeared. Not out of betrayal, out of protection. That was the emotional hook. Because sometimes leaving someone is the only way to save what you love. The memory still hurt years later, especially because she never explained any of it. She simply vanished. Cold, sudden, cruel from Dante's perspective. And she allowed him to believe she betrayed him because the alternative felt even more dangerous. If Dante knew about the baby then, he never would have let them disappear. That was the intellectual hook. Because controlling men protect the people they love. Even when protection becomes another form of imprisonment, a knock against her apartment door shattered Maya's thoughts instantly. Sharp, unexpected, her entire body tightened. Nobody visited this late. Nobody except danger. That was the emotional hook. Because once fear becomes part of your life, every unexpected sound feels like a threat. She moved carefully toward the door, without making noise. The hallway outside remained silent through the peephole, until she noticed a small black envelope resting against the floor. No person, no movement, just the envelope. Maya opened the door cautiously, grabbing it quickly before locking the door again. No name appeared outside, only a single silver crest pressed into the paper, Dante's symbol. Her hands trembled slightly for the first time in years. Not from weakness, recognition. That was the intellectual hook. Because symbols become terrifying once they reconnect you to the life you escaped. Inside the envelope rested one photograph. No message, no threat, no explanation. Just an image. Noah walking beside her earlier that afternoon. And beneath the photo written in clean black ink. He deserves the truth. Maya closed her eyes immediately, because that sentence carried more weight than accusation ever could. Dante still wasn't attacking her, still wasn't forcing anything, still wasn't exposing his anger. He was waiting, and waiting meant he wanted answers first. That terrified her more than rage. That was the emotional hook, because patient men are far more dangerous than emotional ones. Across the city, Dante sat alone in silence after sending the envelope. He told himself he only wanted confirmation, truth, understanding. But something deeper unsettled him now. Guilt, not complete, not accepted fully, but present, because for the first time, he considered the possibility that Maya hadn't abandoned him out of betrayal. She may have been trying to protect their child from him, or worse, from the world he created. That realization struck harder than anger, because Dante had spent years believing control protected people. Now he faced another possibility. Maybe his power had endangered them all along. That was the intellectual hook, because the hardest truths are the ones that force powerful people to question themselves. His memories sharpened painfully now. The threats over the years, the enemies eliminated before reaching him, the betrayals handled violently. And suddenly he saw everything differently. If Maya had been pregnant during that time, then every threat against him became a threat against Noah too. That was the emotional hook, because parenthood changes violence from personal risk into inherited danger. For the first time in years, Dante felt conflict stronger than certainty. Part of him still felt betrayed. She left without trusting him, without telling him, without giving him the choice to protect them. But another part, a quieter, more dangerous part, understood why. That understanding created guilt in ways he never expected. That was the intellectual hook. Because understanding someone's fear often forces you to confront the truth about yourself. Maya sat awake most of the night staring at the photograph. Noah deserved the truth. The sentence repeated endlessly inside her thoughts now. Because Dante was right, but truth itself felt dangerous. If Noah learned who his father truly was, everything changed. That was the emotional hook. Because some truths do not free people. They pull them into entirely different worlds. Morning arrived slowly. Gray light filled the apartment, while Noah ate breakfast quietly at the small kitchen table. Maya watched him carefully. So innocent still untouched by the violence surrounding his bloodline. And she realized with painful certainty that innocence could not survive much longer. Not now. Not after Dante saw him. That was the intellectual hook. Because secrets only protect children until the world discovers them. A sudden news report playing softly from a nearby television caught Maya's attention immediately. Not because of the headline, because of the photograph shown beside it. A man recently released from federal prison after years connected to organized crime investigations. Victor Salazar, one of Dante's oldest enemies. One of the few men who once knew about Maya before she disappeared. Cold fear spread through her instantly, because Victor Salazar had spent years searching for weaknesses inside Dante's empire. And Maya remembered something else now, too. Victor once saw her standing beside Dante years ago. That was the emotional hook. Because the past becomes deadly the moment old enemies start reconnecting forgotten pieces. Maya reached for the remote slowly, lowering the volume before Noah noticed her reaction. But internally, panic had already begun spreading. Not irrational panic. Recognition. The threat she ran from never disappeared. It only waited. That was the intellectual hook. Because dangerous people do not forget valuable targets. They wait for opportunities. And now Noah existed. Visible. Recognizable. Connected to Dante in ways impossible to hide forever. Maya finally understood the terrifying truth she spent 6 years avoiding. Dante discovering Noah was not the worst thing that could happen anymore. The worst thing was other people discovering him too. And somewhere beyond the safety she spent years trying to build, old enemies had already started looking again. Because the threat Maya ran from had never stopped searching for Dante Voss's child. The secret was no longer hidden, and the wrong people had started watching. The moment Maya saw Victor Salazar's face on the television screen, something inside her shifted from fear into certainty. It was happening. The exact future she spent 6 years trying to prevent had finally begun moving toward them. Not slowly, not eventually. Now, that was the emotional hook. Because some fears are not irrational. They are warnings waiting for the right moment to become real. Maya turned the television off immediately, but the damage was already done. Her heartbeat remained uneven while Noah continued eating breakfast quietly, unaware that his entire life had just become dangerous in a way he could not yet understand. Victor Salazar was not simply another criminal. He was connected to the old world, Dante's world. And men like Victor survived by collecting weaknesses. That was the intellectual hook. Because dangerous men do not search for your strength. They search for whatever you would destroy yourself trying to protect. Maya moved toward the kitchen sink slowly, trying to steady her breathing before Noah noticed anything unusual. But internally, memories had already returned. Victor visiting Dante's estate years ago. The coldness behind his smile. The way he watched people too carefully. And worst of all, the way he once looked directly at Maya while saying something she never forgot. Powerful men never lose because of enemies. They lose because of family. At the time, she thought it was manipulation. Now it felt prophetic. That was the emotional hook. Because the most terrifying memories are the ones that become true years later. Across the city, Dante Voss received the same information less than an hour later. Victor Salazar was free, and already rebuilding old connections. The update alone irritated him. But the second report changed everything. Unconfirmed whispers had started moving through underground channels about a possible heir connected to Dante Voss. A child, male, approximately 6 years old. Dante went completely still reading the report, because information spread quickly inside criminal networks. And once rumors existed, people investigated them. That was the intellectual hook. Because secrets are safest before powerful people realize they exist. The room around him remained silent, while his men waited carefully for instruction. No one spoke first, because everyone understood one thing. A child connected to Dante Voss changed the balance of power entirely. That was the emotional hook. Because children transform powerful men from untouchable into vulnerable. Dante lowered the file slowly, his expression unreadable, but internally, realization settled heavily into place now. Maya had been right to fear this world. For years he believed she disappeared out of betrayal. Now he understood something far worse. She disappeared because she understood danger faster than he did. That truth cut deeper than anger ever could. That was the intellectual hook. Because sometimes the people who leave are not abandoning you. They are trying to survive what surrounds you. Meanwhile, another man across the city reviewed the same rumors with growing interest. Roman Cade, head of the Cade family. Cold, strategic, ruthless in ways even other criminal organizations respected cautiously. Roman did not rely on violence emotionally. He relied on leverage. And leverage, in his world, mattered more than bullets. That was the emotional hook. Because intelligent predators do not destroy immediately. They wait until they find the perfect weakness. Roman sat inside a private lounge surrounded by quiet conversation and expensive silence, while one of his men placed Noah's photograph onto the table before him. A grainy image, but clear enough. Roman studied the child carefully, then smiled slightly, not warmly, calculatingly, because children connected to powerful men were never simply children. They were pressure points. That was the intellectual hook. Because in criminal empires, family becomes currency faster than love. Confirmed, Roman asked quietly. Not officially. One of his men answered carefully, but the resemblance is difficult to ignore. Roman leaned back slowly. Dante Voss without emotional weakness had always been dangerous. Dante Voss with a son, potentially unstable. And instability created opportunity. That was the emotional hook. Because enemies do not attack when you're strongest. They attack the moment you become human. Roman's gaze remained fixed on Noah's photograph longer than necessary. Find out where the boy lives. The instruction came calmly, which made it far more dangerous. Because calm decisions lasted longer than emotional ones. That was the intellectual hook. Because quiet orders often create the loudest consequences. Maya felt the shift around her life worsening over the next 2 days. Not obvious. Subtle. The same dark sedan appearing twice near Noah's school. A stranger watching too long from across the street. The sensation of being followed, without seeing who followed. Fear returned completely now. Not fear for herself. For Noah, that was the emotional hook. Because mothers stop fearing death the moment they start fearing what could happen to their child instead. She considered leaving again. New city, new identity. Disappear before things escalated further. But another terrifying truth stopped her. Dante already knew. And if Dante knew, other people eventually would too. Running no longer guaranteed safety. That realization made her feel trapped for the first time in years. That was the intellectual hook. Because escape stops working once the secret becomes public knowledge. That evening, Maya returned home to find 2 black SUVs parked outside her apartment building. Her entire body tightened instantly. Dante's men. Of course. 2 armed guards stood near the entrance respectfully but visibly. Protection, or surveillance. In Dante's world, the line between both rarely existed. That was the emotional hook. Because being protected by dangerous people still feels dangerous. One of the men approached carefully. Mr. Voss wants additional security around you and the boy. Maya's expression hardened immediately. I didn't ask for security. The guard remained calm. With respect, ma'am, this is no longer optional. That sentence terrified her more than she expected, because it confirmed her worst fear. The threat was already real enough for Dante to react publicly. That was the intellectual hook. Because powerful men only increase visible security after recognizing invisible danger first. Maya looked toward Noah beside her instinctively. He stared curiously at the SUVs without understanding why armed men suddenly surrounded their building. And seeing that innocence inside the situation nearly broke something inside her. This was exactly what she spent years avoiding. Noah becoming part of Dante's world. That was the emotional hook. Because the moment children become surrounded by violence, innocence starts disappearing quietly. She wanted to refuse, wanted to reject Dante's involvement completely. But logic fought against emotion now, because Maya understood something terrible. Without Dante's protection, Noah might already be exposed. And exposed children inside Mafia, wars rarely survive long. That was the intellectual hook. Because sometimes accepting protection feels identical to surrender. Dante arrived later that night personally, not because he lacked men, because this situation had already become personal beyond strategy. Maya opened the apartment door slowly, immediately meeting his eyes. Tension filled the silence between them instantly. Not hatred, not even anger anymore. Something more complicated. Shared fear. That was the emotional hook. Because fear becomes different when 2 people love the same child. Dante stepped inside carefully, his presence overwhelming the small apartment immediately. Noah slept down the hallway, unaware that the 2 people shaping his entire future stood only feet apart. Maya crossed her arms tightly. You brought this danger back into our lives. Dante's jaw tightened slightly. It was already coming. The answer silenced her, because part of her already knew he was right. That made everything worse. That was the intellectual hook. Because truth becomes painful when it confirms your worst fears. Dante studied her quietly for a moment. You should have told me. Maya laughed softly then, but there was no humor inside it. And what would you have done? The question lingered heavily between them, because they both knew the answer. Dante would never have allowed her to disappear with Noah. Never. That was the emotional hook, because love from powerful men often comes attached to control. Maya looked away briefly, exhaustion finally surfacing beneath years of composure. I heard your enemies talking about children like they were targets, she admitted quietly. Like leverage, like weaknesses waiting to happen. Dante remained silent, because denying it would be dishonest, and honesty felt brutal inside this conversation. That was the intellectual hook, because the hardest truths are the ones both people already understand. I couldn't raise him inside that world, Maya continued. I couldn't let him become something your enemies use against you. Dante looked toward the hallway where Noah slept. For the first time in years, fear touched him differently now. Not personal fear, protective fear. And protective fear changed men completely. That was the emotional hook. because fatherhood transforms danger from risk into responsibility. He finally understood what Maya spent 6 years carrying alone: the constant fear, the endless awareness, the knowledge that Noah's existence itself made him vulnerable. Dante built his empire by eliminating weakness. Now he faced the one vulnerability he could never remove: his son. That realization settled heavily inside him. That was the intellectual hook. Because the strongest men become weakest where love exists most deeply. Maya watched him carefully now. For years she imagined this moment differently. Anger, accusation, control. Instead, Dante looked almost conflicted, and somehow that unsettled her more. Because conflicted men made unpredictable decisions. That was the emotional hook. Because uncertainty inside powerful people becomes dangerous very quickly. Dante finally looked back toward her. "You should have trusted me." Maya's expression tightened instantly. "No," she answered quietly. "I should have trusted your world less." The words hit harder than shouting ever could, because Dante knew she was right. His enemies were already moving, already watching, already searching for weakness. That was the intellectual hook. Because criminal empires eventually poison everything connected to them. Silence settled heavily again until a phone vibrated sharply inside Dante's jacket. He answered immediately. One sentence changed everything. His expression darkened instantly. "What happened?" Maya felt cold fear rise immediately. Dante listened silently for several seconds before ending the call, then looked directly at her. "The black SUV outside your building?" Maya nodded slowly. "It was just hit 3 blocks away." Her blood froze instantly. "What?" Dante's voice became dangerously calm. "Drive-by shooting. Professional." Maya's breathing stopped briefly. Not random. Not coincidence. An attack. That was the emotional hook. Because reality becomes terrifying the moment fear turns physical. Dante moved toward the window immediately, scanning the street below with cold precision. Every instinct inside him sharpened violently now, because this was no longer theoretical danger. Someone already moved against Noah, against his child. That thought awakened something lethal inside him instantly. That was the intellectual hook. Because men built on violence become monsters when protecting family. Maya stared at him silently, panic spreading beneath her composure now. Everything she feared had become real faster than expected. Too fast. And worst of all, Noah was already in the middle of it. That was the emotional hook. Because children never choose dangerous worlds, adults drag them into them. Dante turned back toward her slowly. "Noah doesn't leave this apartment alone again." The command sounded immediate, absolute. Maya hated how much fear inside her agreed with him, because now she understood one unavoidable truth. The war had already started, and the first attack came before Dante could earn Maya's trust. He could control an empire, but he did not know how to reach his own son. The attack changed everything, not publicly, not politically, personally, because once bullets came close to Noah, the situation stopped being a hidden secret and became something far more dangerous. Family. That was the emotional hook. Because powerful men can survive threats against themselves, but threats against their children destroy their sense of control completely. The apartment no longer felt temporary after that night. It became protected territory. Armed men rotated outside the building 24 hours a day. Surveillance expanded across surrounding streets. Every vehicle passing nearby was checked, tracked, analyzed. Dante rebuilt security around Noah with the same precision he once used to build criminal operations. Only this time, the objective was not power. It was protection. That was the intellectual hook. Because fatherhood changes violence from ambition into defense. Maya watched the transformation carefully over the following days. Dante remained controlled externally, but something beneath the control had shifted. His attention no longer divided naturally between business and strategy. Everything now filtered through one question first. Would Noah be safe? That realization unsettled her deeply, because she had spent 6 years believing Dante would always choose power before people. Now she wasn't completely certain anymore. That uncertainty frightened her in ways she could not explain. That was the emotional hook, because seeing someone change forces you to question everything you believed about them. Noah noticed the changes too. Children always did, even when adults believed they were hiding things successfully. The guards outside, the increased silence around Maya, the constant awareness inside Dante whenever Noah entered a room. None of it escaped him. That was the intellectual hook, because children raised around tension learn observation faster than trust. At first, Noah treated Dante cautiously, not fearfully, carefully, like studying something unfamiliar but important. Dante understood violence, negotiation, fear, but he did not understand how to speak to a 6-year-old boy who looked exactly like him. That terrified him more than he expected, because for the first time in years, Dante Voss faced something he could not control through power. That was the emotional hook, because some men can command entire empires, yet feel helpless standing in front of their own child. The first real interaction happened quietly. Noah sat at the kitchen table sketching shapes into a notebook while Maya prepared dinner nearby. Dante stood near the window reviewing messages on his phone, though his attention remained elsewhere. On Noah, always Noah now, that subtle focus did not go unnoticed by Maya, or by the child himself. That was the intellectual hook, because attention reveals attachment long before words ever do. Noah finally looked up from the notebook. "You're always watching the windows." The question caught Dante off guard immediately, not because of the words, because of how calmly they were said. So observant, so familiar. Dante lowered the phone slowly. "It's safer." Noah considered the answer quietly. "Because bad people are looking for us." Maya's hands froze briefly near the stove. Dante remained still. Children should not understand danger this early. But Noah already did. That realization hurt more than Dante expected. That was the emotional hook, because innocence disappears fastest around violent worlds. Dante stepped closer carefully, choosing his words with unusual caution. There are people who make dangerous decisions. Noah nodded slowly as if processing information beyond his age. "Mama says dangerous people smile a lot." The statement nearly shattered the room's composure, because Maya had said that years ago. To Dante himself, that was the intellectual hook, because children unknowingly carry pieces of both parents inside them. Dante looked toward Maya instinctively. Their eyes met briefly across the kitchen, and for one uncomfortable second, the years between them disappeared. The memories, the pain, the unfinished emotions, all of it remained alive beneath the silence. That was the emotional hook, because unresolved love never fully disappears. It waits beneath everything else. Noah returned to drawing quietly, unaware of the tension surrounding him. Dante stared at the notebook curiously. "What are you drawing?" Noah turned it slightly. A large building, dark cars, small figures standing near gates. Dante recognized the structure immediately. His estate. Noah had only seen it once from outside, yet remembered every detail. That unsettled Dante deeply, because Noah inherited more from him than appearance. Observation, awareness, pattern recognition. The same instincts that made Dante dangerous already existed inside his son. That was the intellectual hook. Because children inherit more than blood, they inherit the way their parents see the world. "You remember details well," Dante said quietly. Noah shrugged slightly. "You do too." The answer landed harder than it should have, because Noah already noticed similarities between them, and Dante realized something painful then. The boy had likely been searching for those similarities long before knowing the truth. That was the emotional hook, because children often recognize absence before adults acknowledge it. Later that night, Maya found Dante alone on the apartment balcony, staring over the city in silence. The cold air surrounded him, but he barely seemed aware of it. For the first time since reconnecting with him, Maya saw something she never expected from Dante Voss. Regret, real regret. That was the intellectual hook, because regret only exists when something matters deeply enough to lose. "You shouldn't be out here alone," she said quietly. Dante didn't look at her immediately. Neither should he. The answer carried more emotion than she expected. Maya leaned against the doorway carefully. "He doesn't know who you are yet." Dante's jaw tightened slightly. but he knows something. And Maya realized he was right. Noah sensed it already. Children always sense emotional truths before hearing explanations. That was the emotional hook. Because blood connections create instincts words cannot fully explain. Dante finally looked toward her. How many birthdays? The question confused her briefly. Then understanding settled. How many what? How many birthdays did I miss? Maya's chest tightened painfully, because there was no anger in his voice now. Only loss. That was the intellectual hook. Because some questions hurt more when asked quietly. 6, she answered softly. Dante looked away again, immediately. The number seemed to hit him harder than violence ever could. 6 birthdays. 6 years. 6 years of first words, sicknesses, school days, fears, laughter, all gone. Moments another man should have lived. That realization hollowed something inside him unexpectedly. That was the emotional hook. Because missed time becomes the one thing power can never recover. For years, Dante believed Maya stole something from him by leaving. Now he understood something else, too. His world stole things from both of them. Her peace, his son, their future. That truth became impossible to ignore now. That was the intellectual hook. Because dangerous worlds do not destroy lives instantly. They take pieces slowly over time. Maya watched him carefully in the silence. This version of Dante felt unfamiliar, less cold, still dangerous, still controlled, but no longer emotionally unreachable. And somehow, that frightened her more than the old version ever did, because emotional men made unpredictable decisions. That was the emotional hook, because vulnerability changes powerful people in dangerous ways. The next morning brought another shift. Noah approached Dante first. Small, careful, but intentional. Dante sat reviewing security reports near the living room window when Noah stopped beside him quietly. What does this mean? He pointed toward one of the maps spread across the table. Dante looked down. Colored markings, surveillance routes, guard positions, normal information inside his world, but impossible to explain normally to a child. That was the intellectual hook. Because dangerous men rarely know how to separate their world from their children. Dante hesitated briefly before simplifying. It's a map to keep people safe. Noah studied it seriously. Like protecting castles? The comparison almost made Dante smile. Almost. Something like that. Noah looked thoughtful. You're protecting us. Not a question. A realization. Dante went still briefly. Because hearing it spoken aloud made everything more real somehow. That was the emotional hook. Because reality changes once a child recognizes your role in their life. Noah remained quiet another moment before asking softly, Are you my father? The room stopped breathing. Maya froze instantly across the kitchen. Dante stared at Noah silently, completely unprepared despite expecting this eventually. And for the first time in years, Dante Voss did not know what to say. That was the intellectual hook. Because the simplest questions often expose emotional truths people are least prepared to face. Noah's expression remained calm, but cautious, as if he already suspected the answer and only needed confirmation. Dante looked toward Maya instinctively. Their eyes met. Years of pain, fear, anger, and unfinished love passed silently between them. Then Maya gave the smallest nod. Permission or surrender. Perhaps both. That was the emotional hook. Because some truths become too heavy to hide forever. Dante looked back at Noah slowly. Yes. The single word changed everything. Noah blinked once. Not shocked, not emotional, just absorbing it quietly, like he had already known. That realization struck Dante deeply, because children understood more than adults wanted to believe. That was the intellectual hook. Because truth rarely surprises children. It only confirms what they already feel. Noah looked down at the map again. So the bad people are looking for me because of you? Maya closed her eyes briefly. The innocence inside the question nearly destroyed her composure. Dante answered honestly. Yes. Noah nodded slowly, then asked something even worse. Did Mama hide me because she was scared? Dante looked toward Maya again, and for the first time since she returned to his life, he fully understood the weight she carried alone all these years. Every fear, every sacrifice, every lonely decision. That was the emotional hook, because understanding someone's pain too late creates a different kind of guilt. She hid you because she loved you, Dante answered quietly. Maya's breathing caught slightly, because despite everything between them, that answer was true. That was the intellectual hook, because love often looks cruel from the outside when it is built from fear. Noah accepted the answer silently, then returned to the notebook as if the conversation changed less for him than it did for the adults around him. Children adapted quickly. Adults carried consequences longer. That was the emotional hook, because children survive emotional storms faster than parents do. Over the next several days, Dante changed in ways even his own men noticed. Meetings shortened. Violence became more calculated. Risk assessments now included civilian exposure automatically, because now every dangerous situation forced the same thought into his mind. What if Noah had been there? That question altered him fundamentally. That was the intellectual hook, because fatherhood changes not only what men protect, but how they think. Maya saw the transformation clearly, too. The anger inside Dante no longer moved recklessly. It moved protectively, responsibly. And that difference slowly complicated her feelings toward him again, because this was the man she once loved before power hardened him completely. That version still existed somewhere beneath the empire. That realization terrified her. That was the emotional hook, because old love becomes dangerous the moment it starts feeling possible again. But Dante understood another truth now, too. Protecting Noah required visibility. More guards, more surveillance, more control, and every layer of protection revealed the same weakness publicly. Dante Voss had something he could not afford to lose. A son. That was the intellectual hook. Because the moment enemies discover what you love most, your vulnerability becomes permanent. Across the city, Roman Cade reviewed new surveillance photographs quietly. Dante visiting Maya repeatedly. Increased security. Protective patterns becoming obvious. Roman smiled slowly, because confirmation no longer mattered. Dante's behavior already proved everything, and enemies only needed one weakness. That was the emotional hook, because predators become patient once they finally locate the heart of their target. And somewhere beyond Dante's control, plans had already begun moving into place, because protecting his son meant revealing a weakness his enemies could destroy. The Mafia boss had finally found his son, but keeping him could destroy them both. The city changed after Roman Cade learned the truth. Not publicly, not visibly, but beneath the surface. Movement began spreading through the criminal networks that controlled the darker side of the city. Information traveled quietly between powerful men, hidden behind coded conversations and careful observation. Dante Voss had a son, and that single truth altered the balance of power completely. That was the intellectual hook, because in violent empires, family is never seen as love first. It is seen as leverage. Roman Cade understood that better than anyone. For years, Dante had remained untouchable because he lacked emotional vulnerabilities. Rivals could attack businesses, territory, shipments, or alliances, but none of those things truly weakened him. People feared Dante because he never reacted emotionally. Now, that had changed. That was the emotional hook. Because once enemies discover what you love most, they stop attacking your empire and start attacking your heart. Roman began slowly, patiently, like a man sharpening a blade before using it. Surveillance expanded around Maya and Noah's movements. Unfamiliar vehicles appeared near buildings connected to Dante's operations. Informants started disappearing from territories near Roman's control. Nothing direct, not yet, but the message was becoming clear. War was approaching. That was the intellectual hook. Because experienced predators rarely strike immediately, they weaken certainty first. Dante recognized the signs immediately. His empire had survived because he understood patterns better than most men understood language. Every movement Roman made carried intention behind it. Pressure, observation, preparation, and all of it centered around Noah. That realization darkened something inside him permanently, because this was no longer a conflict between powerful men. A child had become part of it. That was the emotional hook, because violence feels different the moment innocence becomes involved. Inside the secure estate where Maya and Noah had been relocated temporarily, tension continued building quietly. The mansion remained heavily guarded. Armed men rotated constantly through checkpoints. Vehicles were searched before entering the gates. Surveillance drones monitored surrounding roads day and night. Dante rebuilt the property into a fortress, but Maya hated every second of it. That was the intellectual hook, because protection and imprisonment often look identical from the inside. She stood near one of the tall windows, watching guards patrol outside while Noah slept upstairs. Everything about this estate reminded her why she ran years ago. The weapons, the silence, the controlled fear surrounding every room. Dante entered quietly behind her, but Maya already sensed him. She always had. That was the emotional hook. Because some people remain familiar to you no matter how many years pass. You can't keep him inside forever, she said without turning. Dante stopped several feet behind her. For now I can. Maya finally looked toward him, frustration hardening her expression. That's not living, Dante. His jaw tightened immediately. It's surviving. The answer carried absolute certainty, because Dante no longer separated survival from control. That was the intellectual hook, because people raised in violent worlds often mistake safety for isolation. Maya shook her head slowly. Noah isn't one of your soldiers. He's a child. And Roman Cage sees him as a weapon. The room fell silent after that, because both statements were true. That was the emotional hook, because parents often destroy each other trying to protect the same child differently. Dante moved closer toward the window, watching security teams rotate outside. He's safer here. For how long? Maya asked quietly. Until he grows up surrounded by guards and fear? Until he starts thinking violence is normal? Dante didn't answer immediately, because deep down, he feared the same thing. That was the intellectual hook, because the hardest truths are usually the ones people avoid answering. Maya stepped closer now, her voice softer but more dangerous. This world destroys people, Dante. You know that better than anyone. His eyes met hers slowly. And outside this world, he dies. The words hit harder because they weren't exaggerated. They were reality. That was the emotional hook. Because fear becomes unbearable when both choices feel dangerous. Elsewhere in the estate, Noah wandered through hallways too large and too silent for a child his age. The mansion intimidated him despite the luxury surrounding it. Guards watched constantly. Doors remained locked. Conversation stopped whenever he entered rooms. Even at 6 years old, he understood something important. He was the reason everyone seemed afraid. That realization isolated him quietly. That was the intellectual hook. Because children blame themselves for tension adults create around them. Dante noticed Noah becoming quieter over the following days. More observant, less relaxed. The change disturbed him deeply. Because Noah no longer looked like a child adapting to protection. He looked like a child adapting to danger. That was the emotional hook. Because survival instincts appearing too early in children feel tragic to parents. One evening, Dante found Noah alone near the indoor library, staring at a chessboard left unfinished on a table. You know how to play? Noah nodded slightly. Mama taught me. Dante sat across from him carefully. For several moments, neither of them moved. Then Noah quietly asked, Are all those guards here because of me? The question landed heavily between them. Dante studied his son silently. Noah deserved honesty now. Yes. Noah looked down at the board again. Did I do something wrong? Something inside, Dante nearly broke hearing that. Because children always search for personal blame first. That was the emotional hook. Because innocent people often carry guilt for dangers they never created. No. Dante answered immediately. None of this is your fault. Noah looked thoughtful for a moment. Then why are people trying to hurt us? Dante stared at the chess pieces carefully before answering. Because some people believe hurting others give them power. Noah absorbed the explanation quietly, then moved one chess piece forward. Mama says scared people try hardest to control things. Dante froze slightly. Again, Maya's influence echoed through Noah naturally. That was the intellectual hook. Because children inherit emotional philosophies long before they understand them. Meanwhile, Pressure inside Dante's empire continued increasing. His men noticed everything: the delayed meetings, the increased emotional reactions, the strategic decisions influenced by Maya and Noah's safety. For years, Dante built loyalty through consistency. Now consistency was disappearing. That frightened people around him more than violence ever had. That was the emotional hook, because powerful systems begin collapsing the moment certainty disappears. During a late-night meeting inside one of his private offices, tension finally surfaced openly among his inner circle. Luca Moretti, one of Dante's oldest advisors, studied him carefully across the conference table. "You're reacting emotionally." Dante's expression darkened instantly. "I'm reacting strategically." Luca remained calm. "No, you're protecting family. Those are different things." The room became dangerously quiet after that, because everyone present understood Luca was right. That was the intellectual hook. Because truth becomes dangerous when spoken aloud in powerful rooms. Dante leaned back slowly, his gaze cold enough to silence most men instantly. "You think I've lost control?" Luca answered carefully. "I think enemies are noticing change." And that was worse, because Dante himself already knew it. That was the emotional hook, because hearing your deepest fear confirmed by someone else makes it real. Roman Cade moved faster after that. One of Dante's financial warehouses exploded 2 nights later. No casualties, minimal damage, but the meaning behind it mattered more than destruction itself. Roman wasn't targeting money. He was sending a message: "I can reach what belongs to you." That was the intellectual hook, because symbolic attacks create fear more effectively than direct violence. Maya understood immediately what it meant, and her fear returned stronger than ever. That night, she confronted Dante again inside his office. "This is exactly why I left." Dante stood near the desk reviewing reports, exhaustion visible beneath his controlled exterior. "Leaving didn't stop this. It delayed it. It isolated you. It protected Noah." For 6 years, Dante snapped, and now they found him anyway. The anger in his voice carried something deeper than frustration. Fear. That realization unsettled Maya instantly. That was the emotional hook, because seeing fear inside powerful men changes everything. "You still think control solves everything," Maya said quietly. Dante stepped closer slowly. "And you still think running keeps people safe." The tension between them sharpened immediately. Not hatred, not even anger. Pain. Years of unresolved pain. That was the intellectual hook, because old emotional wounds become more dangerous during crisis. Maya looked away briefly before speaking again. "Noah deserves a normal life. He'll never have one now." The brutal honesty inside the statement silenced the room, because both of them knew it was true. That was the emotional hook, because reality hurts most when no one can argue against it. The next morning brought the final escalation. A black vehicle attempted breaching one of the estate's outer security gates before guards intercepted it. Gunfire erupted briefly outside the property, while Noah remained upstairs unaware. The attackers escaped quickly, but they left something behind. A small silver coin marked with Roman Cade's family insignia. A declaration, a warning, a promise. That was the intellectual hook, because experienced enemies announce war psychologically before fighting physically. Dante stared at the coin in silence for nearly a full minute after security brought it to him. Then something inside him settled completely. Not emotionally, strategically. A decision. That was the emotional hook, because the most dangerous moments happen when fear transforms into certainty. Maya entered the office shortly afterward and immediately recognized a shift in him. "What happened?" Dante looked toward her calmly. "He's forcing my hand." Fear tightened inside her instantly. "What does that mean?" Dante placed the silver coin onto the desk carefully. "It means hiding Noah no longer protects him." Maya's expression hardened. "No." Dante's gaze remained steady. "If I keep him hidden, Roman controls the narrative. Noah stays vulnerable. He's a child, Dante. He's my son." She tried to keep her child a secret, but his eyes revealed a truth that changed all their lives. The city understood the meaning of Dante Voss's announcement before sunrise. Noah Ellison was no longer hidden. He was no longer a rumor. He was no longer a question moving quietly through dangerous circles. He was Dante Voss's son. And in Dante's world, that meant two things at once: protection and war. That was the intellectual hook. Because the moment a secret becomes public, it stops protecting you and starts testing everyone around you. Roman Cade responded the way men, like him, always did. Not with anger, with movement. His people began shifting through the city, testing Dante's borders, touching the edges of his influence, forcing small reactions before creating a larger strike. It was not random. It was pressure. Roman did not want chaos. He wanted Dante emotional. And emotion was exactly what Noah had created inside him. That was the emotional hook. Because enemies do not always attack your body first. Sometimes they attack the part of you that makes you human. Dante saw the pattern immediately. But this time, he did not respond like the man he used to be. The old Dante would have burned through the city without hesitation, eliminating every possible threat before it reached his door. This Dante paused, not because he was weak, because Noah existed, because Maya existed, because every violent decision now carried a second question. What would it cost them? That was the intellectual hook. Because responsibility changes power from reaction into restraint. Maya noticed a change before anyone else. She saw it in the way Dante gave orders with sharper limits. No unnecessary exposure. No civilian risk. No move made only to prove dominance. For the first time, he was not trying to protect his pride. He was trying to protect a future. That realization unsettled her deeply, because it was easier to fear the man she had run from, harder to understand the man he was becoming. That was the emotional hook. Because the hardest people to face are the ones who begin changing after you have already learned how to survive them. But Maya was changing too. For years, running had been her answer. Change the name, change the city, hide the child, stay quiet, survive. But now running no longer felt like protection. It felt like teaching Noah that fear should decide his life. And she could not do that anymore. That was the intellectual hook. Because protection becomes dangerous when it teaches a child to live smaller than he deserves. Noah remained at the center of everything, though no one allowed him to fully understand the storm around him. He watched more than he spoke. He noticed the guards, the tension, the way adults lowered their voices when he entered. And one evening, while Maya sat beside him in the library, he asked the question she had feared most. Are we going to run again? Maya's heart tightened, not because the question surprised her, because he said again. That word carried his whole childhood inside it. Different apartments, different routines, different names, different fears. That was the emotional hook. Because children remember instability, even when parents call it safety. Maya looked at him carefully. No, the answer came quietly. But once spoken, it became real. Noah studied her face. Are you sure? Maya touched his cheek gently, looking into the gray eyes that had changed everything. Yes. And this time, she meant it. That was the intellectual hook. Because courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing not to let fear lead anymore. The final confrontation began 2 nights later. Roman Cade attempted to move against one of Dante's outer safe routes, expecting Dante to rush toward the threat personally. But Dante did not move emotionally. He had learned. Instead, he used Roman's expectation against him. False routes, controlled leaks, decoy vehicles, silent repositioning. Roman believed he was drawing Dante out, but Dante had already turned the trap around him. That was the emotional hook. Because the most dangerous man is not the one who feels nothing. It is the one who feels deeply and still thinks clearly. Maya remained inside the state with Noah, but this time she did not wait helplessly. She made decisions too. She approved Noah's movement within the safe area. She chose what he was told. She stood beside Dante's security team when necessary and refused to be treated like fragile property. Dante allowed it, not because it was easy for him, because he finally understood something. Protecting Maya did not mean controlling her. That was the intellectual hook. Because real protection gives someone more choice, not less. When Roman's men finally entered the false route, Dante's forces closed around them with surgical precision. No public chaos. No wild violence. No reckless display. Just control, but control with purpose. Roman's leverage collapsed before it ever reached Noah. His network was exposed. His closest men were taken. His routes were seized. And by morning, Roman Cade no longer had enough power to threaten Dante's son. That was the emotional hook. Because sometimes victory is not about destroying the enemy. It is about removing their ability to touch what matters. Dante returned to the estate before dawn. Maya was awake. Of course she was. She stood near the hallway outside Noah's room, arms folded, face tired but steady. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They did not need to. She knew Roman had been neutralized. He knew she had stayed. Both choices mattered. That was the intellectual hook. Because trust does not return through promises. It returns through decisions repeated under pressure. Dante looked toward Noah's closed door. He's safe. Maya's eyes stayed on him. For now. Dante accepted the correction without anger. That alone showed how much had changed. Before, he would have promised absolute safety. Now he understood that safety was not a single decision. It was something they would build again and again, together. That was the emotional hook. Because mature love does not pretend danger is gone. It chooses to face it honestly. Maya stepped closer, but not too close. There was still history between them. Pain, secrets, years lost, a child raised without his father, a father denied years he could never recover. None of that disappeared because Roman Cade lost. Truth did not erase damage. It only gave them a place to begin. That was the intellectual hook. Because healing is not the moment pain ends. It is the moment people stop hiding from it. I won't let you take over his life, Maya said quietly. Dante met her eyes. I know. And I won't disappear again just because I'm afraid. His expression shifted slightly. Not surprise. Respect. That's your choice. Maya held his gaze. Yes, it is. And for the first time, Dante did not challenge it. That was the emotional hook. Because the strongest change in a controlling man is when he finally respects a choice that does not belong to him. Noah opened the door a few minutes later, sleepy-eyed and quiet, his small hand rubbing his face. He looked from Maya to Dante, then asked softly, "Is it over?" Dante looked at Maya first, not because he needed permission to answer, because Noah belonged to both of them now, not as ownership, as responsibility. That was the intellectual hook. Because family is not proven by blood alone. It is proven by shared responsibility. Maya knelt beside Noah and brushed his hair back. The worst part is over. Noah looked toward Dante. Are we safe? Dante crouched slightly so he was closer to Noah's level. The gesture was awkward, unpracticed, but real. You are protected. Noah considered that carefully. Then asked, by you? Dante's voice lowered. By both of us. Maya looked at him then, and something quiet passed between them. Not forgiveness, not love fully restored. Something more honest. Trust beginning at the edge of truth. That was the emotional hook. Because some relationships do not restart with romance. They restart with respect. Days passed differently after that. Dante changed the rules around his own world. Noah would not be raised inside fear. He would not be used as a symbol. He would not become a weapon for any family name. Dante made that clear to everyone close enough to matter. And because Dante Voss had finally chosen something beyond power, the people around him understood the empire itself had changed. That was the intellectual hook. Because when a powerful man changes what he protects, he changes what his empire becomes. Maya did not move into Dante's world completely. Not immediately. Not blindly. She kept her independence. Her voice, her right to decide what Noah needed. And Dante, for the first time in his life, learned to stand near someone without trying to control every step she took. That was new for him. Difficult, but necessary. That was the emotional hook. Because real change is not proven in dramatic moments. It is proven in daily restraint. Noah became the bridge between two wounded people who had once loved each other and lost too much to return easily. He did not fix them. Children should never carry that burden, but his existence forced them to become honest, and honesty did what love alone never could. It made them responsible. That was the intellectual hook, because love without truth can break people. but love with responsibility can rebuild them. One evening, Maya found Dante standing near the garden, while Noah played nearby under careful but distant protection. Not surrounded, not trapped, just watched enough to stay safe. Maya stood beside Dante silently. For once, the silence did not feel like fear. It felt like peace trying to learn how to exist. Dante looked at Noah, then spoke quietly. I missed everything. Maya did not soften the truth. Yes. He nodded once. I won't miss what comes next. That was the emotional hook, because the past cannot be recovered, but the future can still be chosen. Maya looked at him for a long moment, then back at Noah. We do this slowly. Dante answered without hesitation. Your way. She glanced at him. Our way, she corrected. And that correction changed everything, because it no longer placed him outside, and it no longer surrendered control to him either. It placed them side by side. That was the intellectual hook. Because the healthiest bonds are not built on control or escape. They are built on shared choice. The city still feared Dante Vos. That had not changed. But inside the one place where fear mattered least, he was no longer only a mafia boss. He was a father, a man learning limits, a man learning that protection without trust could become another cage. And Maya, the woman who once ran to save her son, was no longer running. She stood where she chose to stand. That was the emotional hook, because true safety is not always found in hiding. Sometimes it is found in finally refusing to disappear. Noah laughed across the garden, sunlight catching his gray eyes, the same eyes that had exposed the truth, the same eyes that had forced years of silence into the open, the same eyes that changed Dante Vos forever. And as Maya watched Dante look at his son, with something deeper than power, she understood the final truth. She had hidden Noah to protect him, but the moment Dante saw his eyes, the secret became the reason he would burn the world to protect them.